everyone, and welcome to the Metalbox Studios Learning and Mending. While we wait for people to sign on, I am going to share with you the embroidery of the week. And it looks like the. Oh, nope, she's not here. This is actually Rowena's that she did of a Prince mushroom,
Whoa.
and I wish she was here so she could see. I mean, oh, she's seen it, but I love the detail in the shading that she used with the pink. I just thought it was
So
really beautiful
beautiful.
and delicate, and yet the mushrooms are really strong.
God, it's so much like Leela's flyer art this week.
Yes,
It's
yes,
surprising.
yeah, it's beautiful. I'm sure she'll be here soon, so we'll have to.
Tell us jokes till she arrives, Jen. Anyone have a good mushroom joke?
Anyone? Anyone? Don't hold back. Okay, so I'm gonna hang this up here, and then so we'll take this time. I'll introduce myself. I'm Jen. I use she/her pronouns, and I'm calling from Studio City. And tonight, I will be continuing my underground pattern.
Wow.
I have to
Oh my
say,
God, that's so good.
I am having so much fun with this. It's
Oh,
really it's a lot of fun.
beautiful. What a
Um,
happiness maker.
yeah, so I will now pass this on to someone. Well, they will introduce themselves, and we'll pass it around for a couple minutes, and then we'll begin. So I'm going to pass it to Olan.
Hello, I'm glad to be back after weeks away. My name is Olen. I go by she, her pronouns. I am working on the bird. There's the bird. I'm just kind of filling it in. And there's
Oh,
some,
can you wait? Could you go closer?
yeah, let me see, yeah. I'm just doing the outlining of it right now, and
That's
I
beautiful.
think something over here is a flower, but I'm not sure. I'm hoping it'll all become clear once it's all edged around. And I will turn this over to Susan Clark.
Hi, I'm Susan Clark, calling from the Santa Monica Mountains, and I'm happy to be with you all this evening. And I'll pass it over to James.
Hi, everybody. I'm James, he, him pronouns. And tonight I will be helping with this week's reading on resurgence. Really excited. I will pass to Aaron.
Hello, my name is Aaron. I'm calling in from Metabox Studio, and I go by he, him pronouns. Today I am working on cleaning up a mess, and I will pass it on to Lauren.
I'm Lauren. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm calling from Metabolic Studio. And I will continue making my underground thing that's in the other space. So I'll go get it. And I am happy to be here, and I will pass it on to Stefano.
Hi, everybody. I'm Stefano here in Echo Park. And I'll be looking forward to another very interesting reading session with you all. And I'm gonna pass it to Jaime.
Hi, everybody. My internet's a little slow, it seems like, so I'm signing in two different places. I'm Jaime. I am in Los Angeles right now, enjoying the last little bit of sun from my kitchen. And he, him pronouns, and I will be sharing the screen tonight, and that's about it. Let's see. Caroline.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Caroline. I'm calling from Studio City, and I will be listening tonight. And I'll pass it to who is Echo Art Space?
It's Patricia. I'll change that. Patricia Watts, coming from Santa Fe. That on the lands of the Tewa people. She, her pronouns. Am I the last?
Don't think so.
No. Well, since I haven't been here, someone's going to have to go ahead and nominate themselves.
Actually, I'll take over from here.
Okay.
And if you didn't have an opportunity to introduce yourself, there will be more time later to share also what you're working on as well. The Metabolic Studios Learning and Mending series is now in its 4th evolution. This time around, we are addressing disturbance ecology and what emerges in the blasted landscapes of capitalism. To do this, we will be collectively reading Anna Tsing's The Mushroom at the End of the World on the possibility of life in capitalist ruins. Growing through the last 3 gatherings, the first learning syllabus in response to ongoing racial violence, particularly at the hands of police, the second holding space for megafires that have consumed the West, and the third addressing the larger reality of suffocation and the need for us to revive our breath. In order to gain a deeper understanding of these crises and how they are interconnected, we're building upon these readings in the last 3 series. Many of you have received embroidery kits from us of native plants representing the food and medicine that Metabolic Studio is cultivating. We are adding some new embroidery patterns. We also have more native plants and bird patterns available too. The theme of all the embroideries we've been working towards is biosynosis, which is an association of diverse organisms forming a closely integrated community. If you haven't received an embroidery kit and would like one, or if you finished yours and would like another, please send your name and mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org. And Cindy will put that information in the chat bar. We decided to close the entrance to the Zoom space after the first 15 minutes of the reading to protect the flow and to keep a steady breath. These gatherings are being recorded through Zoom for archival purposes. We thank you for co-creating this opportunity to learn and to mend together during quarantine. Tonight, we'll read pages 179 through 190 from The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anna Tsing. This 10-week series will focus solely on this one book, and our guiding question is, what lives in the ruins we've made? Since the ongoing pandemic began, we've moved our weekly public studio practice to Zoom, where we've committed ourselves to learning and mending together. We invite you to receive these readings as a deep inhale, and we find that crafting together helps receive these readings as a meditation. We will share our screen, and we encourage you to read a section of the text aloud with us. When there is a pause in the reading, please feel free to unmute yourself and begin where the last person left off. Silence is golden, and there is no pressure to fill the transitional spaces while we enjoy a breath and continue crafting. Feel free to jump in and continue reading at your comfort level. You don't have to read, it's also fine to enjoy listening. And now I will pass it over to James.
Thanks, Jen. So today we'll be reading chapter 13, Resurgence. And I will be just sharing this week's discussion question, which we'll be talking about in break rooms and then coming back together to have a larger discussion. So I'm posting in the chat, but I'll read it as well. So the question of this week is, quote, "The sustainability of nature is brought out through human work," end quote. This is a loaded statement. What are your thoughts and feelings on it? So I'll be sharing that again before we jump into the breakout room. And with that, Jaime, you want to share the screen? Thank you. Okay. Active landscapes, Yunnan. The mushroom pickers painted on this market town wall search in oak and pine woodlands, depicted with the disarming charm of a fairy tale. But where is the uncanny force of the forest, which regenerates even from devastation? In celebration of sustainability, the forest's persistent resurgence is hidden in plain sight. Okay, chapter 13, resurgence. One of the most miraculous things about forests is that they sometimes grow back after they've been destroyed. We might think of this as resilience or ecological remediation, and I find these concepts useful. But what if we pushed even further by thinking through resurgence? Resurgence is the force of the life of the forest, its ability to spread its seeds and roots and runners to reclaim places that have been deforested. Glaciers, volcanoes, and fires have been some of the challenges forests have answered with resurgence. Human insults, too, have been met with resurgence. For several millennia now, human deforestation and forest resurgence have responded to each other. In the contemporary world, we know how to block resurgence, but this hardly seems a good enough reason to stop noticing its possibilities. Several practical habits are obstructions. First, expectations of progress. The past seems far away. Woodlands, where forests grow with human disturbance, retreat into shadows because the peasants who work them, as so many authors tell us, are figures from archaic times. It is an embarrassment to bring them up. We've moved on to barcoding life and big data. Yet, how could any catalog match the force of the forest? Thus, second, we imagine that, in contrast to peasants, modern man is in control of all his works. Wilderness is the only place where nature remains sovereign. On human disturbed landscapes, we see only the effects of that modernist caricature man. We have stopped believing that the life of the forest is strong enough to make itself felt around humans. Perhaps the best way to reverse this tide is to reclaim peasant woodlands as a figure for the here and now, not just the past.
For me to reclaim this figure, I had to visit Japan, where Satayama revitalization projects make human disturbance look good in allowing for the continual resurgence of ever-young forest. Satayama projects reconstitute peasant disturbance to teach modern citizens to live within an active nature. This is not the only kind of forest I want to see on Earth, but it is an important kind, a forest within which human household-scale livelihoods thrive. Satayama revitalization is the subject of Chapter 18. Here, I follow the life of the forest, as this leads into more than human sociality and in and beyond Japan. The trail passes through pines and oaks, where peasant farmers have created enclaves of tentative stability in the domains of states and empires. Pines and oaks, in a broad sense, are often companions. Here, resurgence follows blasting. The resilience of pine and oak woodlands remediates the excesses of human-caused deforestation, regenerating the more than human peasant landscape. Oaks and peasants have long histories in many parts of the world. Oak is useful. Above and beyond its strength as a building material, Oak, unlike pine, takes its smooth time in burning. It makes some of the best firewood and charcoal. Better yet, felled oaks, unlike pines, tend not to die. They sprout back from roots and stumps to form new trees. The peasant practice of felling trees in expectation that they will grow back from their stumps is called coppicing, and coppiced oak woodlands are exemplary peasant forest. Coppiced trees are ever young and quick growing, even as they live for a long time. They outcompete new seedlings, thus stabilizing the forest's composition. Since coppice woods are open and bright, they sometimes find room for pines. Pines, with their fungi, colonize denuded spaces, and thus they also take up other parts of the continuum of peasant disturbance. Yet without human disturbance, pine may give way to oak and other broadleaf trees. It is this pine-oak-human interaction that gives the peasant forest its integrity. As the quick growth of pine on repeatedly human denuded hillsides yields to long living stands of coppiced oak, forest ecosystems are regenerated and sustained.
Associations of oak and pine define and anchor peasant forest diversity. The long life of coppiced oaks, together with the quick colonization of empty spaces by pines, creates a tentative stability in which many species thrive, not just humans and their domesticates, but also familiar peasant companions such as rabbits, songbirds, hawks, grasses, berries, ants, frogs, and edible fungi. Like the lives in a terrarium in which one creature produces oxygen so that another may breathe, the diversity of peasant landscape can be self-sustaining. Yet history is always at work, both generating the terrarium and undermining it. Might the imagined stability of peasant landscapes follow upon great cataclysms and the devastation I call, quote, blasted landscapes that bring them into existence? Yes, I think peasant communities are defined by their subordination within states and empires. It takes power and violence to hold them in place. The multi-species assemblages they form are creatures too of the play of imperial power, with its property forms, its taxes, and its wars. Yet this is no reason to disparage the rhythms that develop around peasant life. Peasant forests tame blasted landscapes to make them sites of multi-species life and peasant income. Peasant living channels and taps of forest resurgence that cannot fully control. But it recuperates larger scale destructive projects, bringing life to damaged landscapes.
In Japan, one place to begin is not with humans, but with the gray-faced buzzard, a lover of Satoyama. These buzzards are migratory, mating in Siberia, then coming to Japan for the spring and summer to raise their young before flying off to Southeast Asia. Male buzzards feed nesting females during egg incubation. They sit atop pine trees, surveying the landscape, looking for reptiles, amphibians, and insects. In May, paddy fields are flooded, and the buzzards look for frogs. When grown rice blocks hunting, the buzzards look into the peasant woodlands for insects. One study found that male buzzards are unwilling to sit on a given tree for more than 14 minutes if they spot no food. The peasant landscape must be laid out as a larder with frogs and insects appropriately arrayed for these birds to thrive. Gray-faced buzzards have adapted their migration patterns to the Japanese peasant landscape. Meanwhile, all their foods are equally dependent on this disturbance regime. Without maintenance of the irrigation system, the frog population declines, and so many insects have evolved just to live with peasant trees. Kenora oak has at least 85 specialist butterflies that depend on it as food. One colorful butterfly, Sasakia charanda, requires the sap of young oaks. Kept young by peasant copicing. When copicing is not maintained, the oak grows old and the butterfly declines. How is it that the ecological relations of peasant forests have come to be the subject of so much research, especially now that Japan's woodlands have been largely abandoned? As fossil fuels have replaced firewood, and as the younger generation has moved to the city, some researchers are clear future stability is best modeled with the help of nostalgia. At least that was the view of Professor K, an environmental economist in Kyoto. Professor K told me he had become an economist because he thought he could help poor people. But 10 years into a successful career, he realized his research was helping no one. Worse yet, he saw the glazed eyes of his students. He spoke to them and knew it wasn't just his lectures. His students too had lost touch with questions that mattered. Professor K reconsidered his life trajectory. He remembered his visits as a boy to his grandparents' village, how alive he felt as he explored the countryside. That landscape sustained people rather than sapping their strength. So he turned his professional work toward restoring Japan's peasant landscape. He argued and pushed until his university obtained access to an area of abandoned fields and forest, and he took his students there, not just to look, but also to study the skills of peasant life. Together they learned. They re-cleared the irrigation channels, planted rice, opened up the forest, built a kiln to make charcoal, and found their way into taking care of the forest with the eyes and ears of peasants. How enthusiastic his seminars were now. He showed me the overgrown, abandoned forests that still crowded around their reclaimed fields. There was so much work to do to make a sustainable peasant forest emerge from the tangled brush. Moso bamboo, he explained, had gone wild here, brought from China some 300 years ago for the excellence of its bamboo shoots. Plantings had always been carefully trimmed around peasant households. But as peasant forests and fields have been neglected, the bamboo has become an aggressive invader, taking over the forest. He showed me how it was suffocating the remaining pines, cloaking them in the deep shade that made them vulnerable to pine wilt. But his students were cutting back bamboo and learning too to make it into charcoal. The copiced oaks were also in trouble. He admired the ancient stools that had regrown over and over into trees, but a wilderness of other plants now surrounded them. And since they had not been copiced for many years, they no longer retained the always youthful qualities that shaped the architecture of the forest. He and his students, he explained, would have to learn the art of coppice again. Only then, he said, could they attract the plants and animals of the peasant landscape, the birds, shrubs, and flowers that made Japan 4 seasons so fruitful and inspiring. Because of the work they had already done, he said, these life forms were beginning to come back. But all this was an ongoing labor of love. The sustainability of nature, he said, never just falls into place. It must be brought out through that human work that also brings out our humanity. Peasant landscapes, he explained, are the proving grounds for remaking sustainable relations between humans and nature.
Peasant forests have only recently come into focus in Japan. Before the past 30 years, foresters and forest historians were obsessed with the aristocrats among trees, Japanese cedar and cypress. When they wrote about Japan's forests, they were usually thinking about just these two trees. There is good reason. These are beautiful and useful trees. Sugi, called cedar, but actually a distinctive cryptomeria, grows straight and tall like a California redwood, producing a glorious, decay-resistant wood for boards, paneling, posts, and pillars. Hinoki, Japanese cypress, Chimeciparis obtusa, is even more impressive. The wood is sweetly scented and can be planed to a beautiful texture. It resists rot. It is the perfect wood for temples. Both hinoki and sugi can grow to enormous. Oh, I think I can't quite see the top of the page. Let me change my sizes, allowing awe-inspiring posts and boards. No wonder that Japan's early rulers did their best to cut down all the shugi and hinoki in the forest for their palaces and shrines. Early aristocratic fixation on the sugi and hinoki opened possibilities for peasant claims on other trees, particularly oaks. In the 12th century, wars fractured the unity of aristocrats, allowing peasants to institutionalize claims to village forests. Iriai rights are common land rights shared by villagers, allowing enrolled households to gather firewood, make charcoal, and use all the products of village lands. In contrast to common forest rights in many other places, iriai rights in Japan were codified and enforceable in courts of law. Yet it was unlikely to find a sugi or hinoki in Japan's pre-modern iriai forests. Those trees were claimed by aristocrats, even if they grew on village lands. But sometimes peasants could claim oaks even on the lord's land. Iriai can operate as a layer of use rights on land owned by others. Lords, provided for by others, didn't need oak. Still, it is not surprising that elites have tried very hard to cut back on iriai rights. After the 19th century Meiji Restoration, many commonly held lands were privatized or claimed by the state. Amazingly, despite all odds, some iriai forest rights have been maintained through to the present, to fall into difficulty from the late 20th century abandonment of village forests as rural people flocked into cities. What trees define the iriai village forest? Japanese are proud of their location at the crossroads of temperate and subtropical suites of plants and animals. Japan has 4 seasons and is green all year round. Subtropical plants and insects are shared with Japan's southern neighbors in Taiwan. A cold weather flora and fauna are shared with the Northeast Asian mainland. Oaks stretch across the divide. Deciduous oaks with large translucent leaves that turn color and fall off in winter. form part of the northeastern flora. Evergreen oaks with smaller and thicker leaves that are green all year come from the southwest. Both kinds of oaks are useful for fuel and charcoal, but in some important tradition-setting parts of central Japan, deciduous oaks are preferred to evergreens. Peasants weeded out evergreen oak seedlings along with the rest of the underbrush and grass that grew under the trees, privileging the deciduous species. This choice made a difference for the oak-pine relationship and the architecture of the forest. Unlike evergreen oaks, which offer constant shade, deciduous oaks leave bright spaces in the winter and spring where pines, as well as temperate herbaceous plants, might have a chance. Furthermore, peasants continually opened up and cleaned out the forest, letting pines and other temperate species in among the oaks.
Unlike pre-modern European peasants, pre-modern peasants in Japan did not raise milk or meat animals, and so they could not fertilize their fields with manure as Europeans did. Gathering plants and forest duff for green manure was a major occupation of peasant life. Everything on the forest floor was taken, leaving it clear to the bare mineral soils favored by pine. Some areas were opened up to favor grass. The pillars of this disturbed forest were coppiced oaks. The most common was Caris serrata, known as Conara. Oak wood was useful for all kinds of things, from firewood to growing cultivated shiitake mushrooms. Periodic coppicing kept the oak trunk and branches young, allowing oaks to dominate the forest as they grew back faster than other species could become established. On ridges, in open meadows, and on denuded hillsides grew akamatsu, red pine, Pinus denisflora, with its partner Matsutake. Japanese red pine is a creature of peasant disturbance. It cannot compete with broadleaf trees, which both shade it out and create rich and deep humus layers that only add to their advantage. Paleobotanists have found that several thousand years ago, when humans first began to deforest the Japanese landscape, red pine pollen increased dramatically from previous levels of almost nothing. Pine thrives with peasant disturbance. The bright sunshine of clearing and coppicing, the bare, raked mineral soils. Oak can drive out pine on peasant hillsides, but the practices of coppicing and the gathering of green manure created complementary spaces for the Conara oak and the Akamutsa pine. Matsutake grew with the pine, helping it to find a footing on ridges and eroded slopes. In particularly denuded areas flush with pine, Matsutake was the most common forest mushroom. In the 19th and 20th centuries, members of Japanese burgeoning urban middle class began to visit the countryside on outings associated with the search for the Matsutake. This had once been an aristocratic prerogative, but now many could participate. Villagers designed areas of pine and Matsutake as guest mountains and charged urban visitors for the privilege of a morning's mushroom picking, followed by a sukiyaki lunch and the refreshing outdoors. This practice wove an effective bundle in which Matsusaki hunting wraps all the pleasures of rural biodiversity into the escape from ordinary cares. Like childhood visits to one's grandparents' farm, Matsusaki outings sent the rural with nostalgia. And this scent has continued to influence present-day appreciation of rural landscapes. Contemporary advocates of the restoration of Japanese peasant landscapes may anesthetize the peasant forest, wrong word, as the planned result of traditional knowledge, creating nature and human needs in harmony. Yet many scholars suggest that these harmonious forms developed out of moments of deforestation and environmental destruction. Kazuhiko Takeuchi, an environmental historian, stresses that the extensive deforestation associated with Japan's industrialization in the mid-19th century. He argues that historical changes have been key to the peasant's forest that today's advocates have come to imagine. The forests of the first half of the 20th century. In the late 19th century, Japan's modernization put pressure on peasant forests, leading to massive deforestation in central Japan. Visitors noted the array of bald mountains visible along the roads. By the turn of the century, these bare hillsides were growing back in the Akamatsu pine. In some cases, pine was planted, for example, for watershed management. But Akamatsu seeds spread everywhere, and the pine, with the help of the matsutake, came up by itself. In the first part of the 20th century, matsutake was as common and abundant as the pine forests. With growing demands for firewood and charcoal, oak coppicing was also active. The pine oak woodlands of contemporary nostalgic views were in full flower.
Fumihiko Yoshimura. Hold on. Sorry. Two different speakers here. Fumihiko Yoshimura, a mycologist and pine forest advocate, emphasizes a later deforestation. The disturbance of forests leading up to and during World War II. Trees were cut down not only for peasant uses, but also as fuel and building supplies for the military buildup. The peasant landscape was significantly denuded. After the war, these landscapes experienced regreening. Pines grew up on bare landscapes. Dr. Yoshimura would like to restore the pine forests to a 1955 baseline, a time of regrowth. After that, instead of renewal, the forest deteriorated. I saved the story of the post-50s transformations that changed the forest for later chapters. Here, I want to spotlight the questions of how great historical disturbances may open possibilities for the comparatively stable ecosystems of the ever young and open peasant forests. It is ironic that these episodes of deforestation gave rise to the forests that have become the very image of stability and sustainability in much contemporary Japanese thought. This irony does not make the peasant forest less useful or desirable, but it shifts our appreciation of the work of living forest resurgence Every day, peasant efforts are often responses to historical shifts far out of their control. Small disturbances eddy within the currents of big disturbances. To appreciate this point, it seems useful to turn away from the nostalgia-driven reconstructions of Japanese advocates and volunteers, which lull us out of history by their aesthetic perfection. In central Yunnan and southwest China, peasant forests are not nostalgic reconstructions, but are actively used by peasants. They are not considered objects of ideal beauty, but disasters that need to be cleaned up. They do not look like reconstructions. They are messy at best, and sometimes provocatively so. This is the peasant landscape in motion, not recreated through nostalgia. Despite its offending disorder, in many ways, this ever young and open forest has a striking resemblance to central Japanese peasant woods. Although the species are different, coppice oaks and pine form the forest architecture. Yunnan's Matsutake has different proclivities than its Japanese siblings. It grows with oaks as well as pines, but this makes the peasant oak-pine Matsutake complex even more evident. Perhaps here too is the great cataclysms that rather than only peasant ingenuity, perhaps here too it is great cataclysms rather than only peasant ingenuity that allowed this forest resurgence. In central Japan, I was offered attractively potted peasant forest histories, not just by scholars, but also by foresters and rural residents. Once trained inside this discourse, my work was easy. All I had to do was look and listen. Thus trained, I was surprised in Yunnan when the very idea of a peasant forest history provoked confusion and defensiveness. Everyone wanted peasants to be good forest managers, but it was through their skills as modern entrepreneurs, not traditional stewards, that they would know how to manage. Peasants' forests were a modern object, a result of decentralization, not an old one, and the goal of forest experts was to make modern rationality possible. If forests were in a bad shape, it was because of mistakes were made in the past. History was the story of those mistakes.
Michael Hathaway and I spoke to foresters and even forest historians. They explained how the state had enclosed forests and how, in this time of reform, they had passed them back to the peasants via household contracts. They spoke of the 1998 logging ban, which was meant to stop the damage, and of the model projects through which new forms of forest management were tried.
Michael Hathaway and I spoke to foresters and even forest historians. They explained how the state had enclosed forests and how, in this time of reform, they had passed them back to the peasants via household contracts. They spoke of the 1998 logging ban, which was meant to stop the damage, and of the model projects through which new forms of forest management were tried. When I turned the conversation to forest histories, they spoke again of the state, of its mistakes. Individually contracted household forests were the new way to organize forests, and they would have to grow in places damaged by earlier collective management. The key, they thought, was to sort out tenure and incentives, allowing entrepreneurs, not bureaucrats, to manage. In these new times, the forests would be remade with the market. We spoke of laws, incentives, and model projects. I hadn't yet touched the trees. I missed the aesthetic objects I had come to know in Japan, even as I now saw their strangeness. When I arrived in rural Chuseong Prefecture, people were equally unhappy with my Japan-taught questions. Village officials recapitulated national stories of changing administrative categories, but ordinary residents didn't know what to do with those categories. Finally, one elderly man made a comment that started a more productive comparison moving in my mind. During China's Great Leap Forward, he said, the landscape was deforested by the need for green steel. Wasn't Japan's Meiji era deforestation also about green steel?
The forest in central Yunnan is mainly sparse and young. It looks disturbed. Tracks run through the eroded hillsides. Despite the ban on commercial timber, everything is used from the ground to the tree stops. Evergreen oaks dominate the landscape, ranging from shrubs to coppice trees. Yet the forest is open. Pine mix with the oaks. Pine, like oak, has many uses. Pine resin is sometimes tapped. Pine pollen is gathered to sell to the cosmetic industry. Some pines also produce commercially valuable edible seeds. Pine needles are gathered for bedding for the pigs each household raises. Pig feces held together by pine needles are a major fertilizer for crops. Herbaceous plants are gathered for food for the pigs, as well as for food and medicine for people. Pig food is cooked every day with firewood on an outdoor stove. Thus, even where households have other fuel sources for human cooking, every household gathers great stacks of firewood. Shepherds bring cattle and goats to browse wherever land is not obviously under crops. Commercial picking of wild mushrooms, not just matsutake, but many species, creates foot traffic in the forest. In some places, groves of serious trees are still available for a vigorous, if illegal, timber trade. But in most areas, the trees are thin and small. Exotic eucalyptus, first planted for a village-based oil industry, spreads along the roads. This is a hard forest to promote as a timeless peasant wisdom, although brave Chinese scholars have tried. The messy peasant forest does little to satisfy foreign conservationists who have flocked to Yunnan to save endangered nature, and they are quick to blame the excesses of communism for deviations from their wilderness dreams. Young Chinese scholars and students follow the foreign lead. More than one young city person told me that Yunnan's hills were deforested by Red Guards during China's Cultural Revolution, although this story seems unlikely. The Cultural Revolution is an easy scapegoat for everything that seems wrong. To attribute forest damage to this period mainly indicates that the faults of this young and open forest are easy for everyone to see. It is in this context that it seems striking to note similarities between peasant forests in central Yunnan and central Honshu, Japan. Perhaps Japan's oak pine forests in their prime were less aesthetically and ecologically perfect than they are imagined by advocates now. Perhaps Yunnan's oak pine forests are better than critics imagine. Those eroded hillsides are the site of a lively regeneration in which oak, pine, and matsutake have a good thing going, not just for peasants, but also for many kinds of life. The time delays are eerily similar. Central Yunnan's forests suffered during China's great leap forward of the late 1950s and early 1960s when China mustered its resources for rapid industrialization. The quote, green steel to which the old villager referred was used in part to fuel backyard furnaces in which peasants melted down their pots to contribute the metal to China's development. Some forests were protected, but in the next decade, the central government cut lumber from these forests for export to raise foreign currency. 40 to 50 years later, pines had colonized bare spaces and oak stools had sprouted into trees. The peasant forest was in full flower. The Matsutake mushrooms were one sign of its success.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. Similarly, central Japan's forests suffered during Japan's rapid industrialization in the decades after the Meiji Restoration of 1868. 40 to 50 years later, peasant oak pine forests achieved the perfection for which they are remembered today. After the initial disturbance, as in China, peasants learned to make the regrowing trees work for them. The interlocking uses of the forest fit together. The landscape became recognizable and seemed increasingly stable and thus harmonious. Oak supplied building materials, firewood, and charcoal. Pine supplied matsutake mushrooms, as well as wood, turpentine, needles, and fast-burning fuel. Perhaps the living peasant forests of the early 20th century Japan looked a little like today's forests in central Yunnan. Although historians rush to differentiate the modernization achieved by Japan's Meiji Restoration and the failures of China's Great Leap Forward, from the perspective of a tree, there may not have been much difference. If peasant forests are viewed differently in each context, it may be, in part, be contrast between close and distant, and forward and backward-looking views. People and trees are caught in irreversible histories of human disturbance, but some kinds of disturbance have been followed by regrowth of a sort that nurtures many lives. Peasant oak forests have been eddies of stability and cohabitation, yet they are often put into motion by great cataclysms, such as the deforestation that accompanies national industrialization. Small eddies of interlocking lives within great rivers of disturbance. These are surely sites for thinking about human talents for remediation. But there is also the forest point of view. Despite all insults, resurgence has not yet ceased. Okay. Sorry, I forget, are we going to breakout rooms or are we doing the video first? I can't remember the order.
Breakout.
Okay, breakout. So before we go into the breakout room, I will just repost the discussion question, which is, quote, "The sustainability of nature is brought out through human work," end quote. This is a loaded statement. What are your thoughts and feelings on it? And with that, Jen, will you send us away?
I will, and we'll be in the breakout rooms for approximately 8 minutes, so you can start that discussion, and then we'll all come back together, and I'll invite us all back together. So I'll see you in about 8 minutes. Did you get a room?
My phone got a room, but I ignored it because I wanted to join with my computer.
Okay, I just assigned
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, I'm jumping to a room. See ya. Hello, everyone. I think we're all slowly making our way back. And it looks like we might all be here. Would someone like to start out what their recap was from their breakout room?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit, and anybody who is in our group, please feel free to jump in if I'm quoting something you said. But we were just kind of, Olin brought up a great question as to why we wrote the statement this is a loaded statement. And because it's an interesting question, one where what we're learning in this chapter is a very unique role that humans can play within their own livelihood that benefits a forest and is actually needed for a forest, not necessarily by us, but that kind of disturbance. But also, I think a lot of us have talked about this before, kind of, at least for me, coming up in a US education system around nature and ecology. For a while, I thought the best thing to do in a forest was to just kind of like, you know, make more acres and don't touch it, and don't like just let the bears and the birds and the bees do their thing, and like, you know, ban humans from going in there. So there's this kind of tension in that statement where it clashes with that perspective.
Yeah, I think in our group there was definitely a tension with that, you know, or and even a disagreement with that statement at all, of like, wait, like, are humans even part of nature? Like, sustainability of nature and humans seem like opposite of each other, and so the conversation went in that direction of like, what are humans? What is the role of humans in nature, and how do we and how do we see ourselves? Like, are we a part of it or are we not?
I think our breakout room sort of said both. We humans are essential in sustainability, and nature does its thing in addition to that in mysterious ways. So we see them as separate and coexisting courses, and both valuable, that shouldn't necessarily negate one another. They're not a dialectic, in other words.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, especially because Singh often refers to, in the book, she writes man with like a big capital M, and is referring to kind of like the division of humans as that kind of word, as it being like, or even just humans with a capital H. And that is oftentimes why we kind of, that we separate ourselves. And so therefore nature is this thing to be dominated and mastered, and arguing that that can come from that division. But I also agree that I think it's really important to include ourselves in it and to not forget that, but also important to respect the way that nature makes itself felt and the way it keeps itself unknown, even to the greatest abilities of our intellect or understanding. Another thing that we chatted about in the group, and Jaime had talked about this in our preparatory session for tonight's reading, which the statement, I feel like, also can make it sound like humans are meant for this task of disturbance, and that can be, you know, a little off-putting. It makes me feel like we're making ourselves too important. But Jaime also brought up that unfortunately we've kind of killed off all of, or at least driven to the point of extinction, all of the large mammals on Earth that play a role in doing, you know, knocking down, we were talking about apple trees that bears knock down, and breaking branches in the forest that create this coppicing effect that trees need to be in this ever young, ever growing state that's really important for all the birds and bugs that follow. And so for us, it felt like maybe it's a recognizing that we've gotten rid of these organisms that have played a role, and knowing that we were part of that, it's now our responsibility to kind of take up mantle, because other things can't really anymore because we've driven them out.
I also think like the book, this chapter really makes a good case about how something that may look like a forest may actually be a classification of forest that she was calling a peasant forest, which actually is a lot more constructed than it is quote unquote natural, although there's definitely natural elements in it. So I think it kind of, that's a sort of interesting part of that question about, is it sustainability or nature? A lot of it has to do with the brevity of life, you know, of human life, and how hard it is to perceive even what's healthy or what's not healthy. Like it may take a really long time for a forest to really mature into something that looks like a vital, healthy forest, but it doesn't mean it's not well. And so we might make decisions to make that forest look well by our standards in our lifetime. And I think that's where the sort of ambiguity comes in, you know, is that because we're judging from our own experiences about time and season and place and storms, and we might misjudge the logic of nature or the teleological nature of nature, how one thing leads to the next, which is really fascinating. Again, example of, yes, they're both true. Like we can do what we can to help something along, but there's also another parallel narrative that has nothing to do with us. But it also does have to do with us because we have such a like big, loud, messy presence.
I think that's happening right now in our area with the oaks regenerating, the felled oaks that are regenerating, that was talked about in the text. We can actually see that happening where I am, and that we have some people in the canyon saying, get rid of them for fire, except they're thriving with nature. I mean, just thriving, like with everything that actually uses that wonderful felled oak. So I think that it'd be nice if there was more education out there in regard to that. My son didn't want up here, but he agrees.
Yeah, Lauren, the issue of time is very interesting. Just even reading this chapter about the similar time delay between the deforestation in Japan and the 50 years after the regeneration that came back, and even in Yunnan with the Great Leap Forward, and I think they said it was something like 50 years. But even that is like if you think about, you read this book, or I'm reading this book and thinking like, oh, like this is like, these are such great ways for people to engage with regenerative work and like a way to move forward, or not forward, but a different way of life. But also it's kind of scary, when you think about like, oh, if you take the advice, but you got to wait 50 years to know whether or not it worked. And I don't know if I'll be there in 50 years or not. And that's it's a huge risk as well. But it's, again, time makes things so difficult because you don't know how things are going to end up. 50 years or 100 or even 1,000, how things cascade within the life web and the evolution of life on this planet.
I thought that,
Sorry, Rowena, go ahead.
I just thought it was interesting in relation to time, the idea of this coppiced forest achieving a sort of eternal youthful state, kind of stepping outside time and becoming cyclical rather than linear.
I mean, again, to come back to that gray area between nature and sustainability, a lot is being said right now about the power of the earth, power of soil, power of dirt to sequester carbon and give off oxygen. And it doesn't take that much effort to crack open the already breaking folded crevices of tarmac. And if you could just do that and trust that nature would take care of the rest, that would be a very good example of where you're providing a sustainable advancement for nature to repair herself. You might be speeding things up by a couple 100 years. Probably worth doing. So
Let's get the pickaxes out.
Oh yeah.
Who here has seen Kiss the Ground? Yeah, you've seen it, Lorna. Well, I mean, they give examples in there how, you know, in China, took 20 years to like create this, you know, the valley was a complete desert. And then it has trees and, you know, you have to bring animals in. Do you have animals at Metabolic or?
well, we don't have anything, but there's a whole food system that's rebooted itself there. We have coyote, rabbit, cats, birds. I mean, we don't have pets or livestock. You know, that's not what we're doing. We're undeveloping a brownfield and creating the context for the web of life to repair itself.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not having animals, but we do collect manure as part of what we're spreading on the ground.
Right.
From the utility that we're forming from within the utility.
Slime molds, anybody?
Yeah, let's do it.
Can I share an interesting?
I noticed that.
Oh,
I
okay.
think my internet connection isn't good enough to share video.
No problem. Can I share a interesting fact about slime molds?
Yes.
And forgive me for anybody who's already heard it, but in Japan, infrastructural engineers were looking at how to build the most efficient transit system based on population. And what they did was they took a map of Japan and took the major cities and kind of like gave a amount of food that was representative of a large population versus a small population. And then they introduced a slime mold to the map and the food. And the slime mold grew all over it. And but then what it did was it kind of reduces its network after time. And so it grew along and strung together all these different nodes of towns and cities. And then they got mathematicians to analyze mathematically how efficient the system was. And the slime mold made a perfectly optimal system. It was 100% mathematically optimized by slime molds, which is, I think, just a really wild thing, and definitely a way we should build transit systems, especially talking in LA where our transit systems are kind of a mess.
That's fantastic.
I think I just took one of those from under my kid's bed today. One of those molds. Something was there for a long time.
You should study it. It's trying to tell you something.
Okay.
Would anyone like to share what they've been working on? I'll start. I've made some real strides. I've added blue to the orange ring. I jumped ahead. I usually like to fill it all in, but I was just too excited with this color.
That's great. I love that design too. It's wonderful.
We can.
Beautiful, Jen.
Anybody would like one?
I'll be
She
working
looks
on this
like
bird
coloring.
for another 6 months.
No, no, no. Patricia, how's yours? It's hard to see yours with the background. It's cutting out.
Can you hold it up again? Couldn't see it fast enough.
Me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ooh, go up a little bit higher.
Wow.
That looks like an intense one to embroider.
It's like a 5,000 piece jigsaw puzzle.
Keep
What
going.
is
You're on a
it?
roll. It's beautiful. The network.
Junie. Hi, June.
Juniper.
Hi, June. Hi, June.
Hi, June.
She's hard at work on that spoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doing.
June's wearing a ton of clothes today. What's going on over there?
I know. It's so civilized. Come on, kid. No.
These are the Zoom moments I love the best. Everybody pin Aaron.
What are we doing?
Oh, is that one of Judith Greenborough's pieces behind you on the wall?
It is, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's just like the one Roxanne's mom has.
It looks
Yeah.
great.
I think we both bought them on the same day up in Lone Pine.
That's so great.
I
How fun.
remember. Beautiful. It looks really good.
One of my favorites. I was really taken by it before I actually knew what it was. From a distance, I was like, what is that?
Yeah, I love them too. I think they're great.
What is it?
Yeah.
It's rusted, sweetened condensed milk cans found in the middle of the desert.
Okay.
They're all the same
Wow.
kind of can, and she arranges them like in opposite setting.
Wow.
I thought it was wood. I couldn't tell.
Yeah.
Joan, we gotta eat some dinner now.
I can't see them.
You can speak very well now. I haven't heard you speak for a long time.
Can you say hi to Olan?
Hi,
Can you
June.
use your mouth? Can you say hello?
Hello.
Do you have both of your teeth, June, in front?
No, just one.
Just one.
Yeah, the other one broke.
Uh-huh.
She fell off the table.
Oh well. It makes you look a bit older than you are.
Yeah.
It ages you.
Well, we were thinking about ending the readings or the sessions with some questions. There's no pressure to report back with homework or anything like that, but a lot of Singh's books, I feel like, inspires us to search for things in our world that she's covering. So would it be okay with everybody if I read off a little question, little no pressure homework?
Absolutely.
Okay. And there's a couple, but again, these are just to inspire you to carry some questions with you during the week. So the first one is, resurgence is the force of the life of the forest. What are some examples of resurgence you've witnessed? The second is, what are some practices of human work that feed resurgence of forests or landscapes? And the last one is, it can be easy to see when human work is not sustainable. What kinds of noticing and sensitivity must we cultivate to see when it is? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, James.
Thank
Thank you.
Just to say, next week, I'll be teaching up in the Owens Valley with Suzanne Lacey, a course called Disturbance Ecology, which is partly based on some of the readings we've done. And the 14 students who will be with us will be coming to this group. So they're all performance students at USC in graduate school. And Suzanne's course is on the performance of ecological activism. And she wanted the students to do a deep dive into the more than a decade of work that I've been doing between Los Angeles and Owens Valley, or Paya Hunadu. So part of their immersive will be to participate in this. So next week, if you come, there'll be a slightly bigger group of people who knows, maybe they'll join afterwards.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to that.
Me too. Jaime is going to be up there with me, so that's his skies from up there. So he's prepping the screen for that.
James, do you think you could put the questions into the, oh, you did.
Yes,
Yeah, good.
I'm about to right now.
Yeah.
Great idea. Thanks,
Yeah.
Rox and Michelle.
Thank you. See you next time.
Good to see you, Olan.
Good to be here again. Ciao.
There you go. Oh, my video went off. Weird. All right, everybody, I'm gonna hop off and eat some dinner. Again, thanks everybody for reading and participating and listening, and really looking forward to next week, Lauren.
Me too. Thanks. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
See you
All
next.
right, thank you, everyone.
Good night.